Hi guys, it's Angela here. Welcome to today's video. Today we're going to be talking about education and Jehovah's Witnesses. So stay with me to the end of this video. So, why is it that the governing body, the leadership team of Jehovah's Witnesses, do not encourage its members, and in particular its young people, to seek an education? This is what we're going to be exploring in this video today. Now, if this is your first time visiting my channel, then welcome. Please subscribe by hitting the red subscribe button and the notification bell to ensure you don't miss a future video. And if you've previously subscribed, then welcome back. It's great to have you here with me. Now, as I was growing up as a Jehovah's Witness in the 70s, 80s and 90s, the idea of young people, including myself, going on and getting an advanced education was very much frowned upon by the governing body of the Jehovah's Witnesses and also the local elders in my congregation. Now, whilst I know that that is still very much the view and perspectives, then individuals and their families do decide what course of education their children take. Now, a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses encourage their children to do the formal education but not go on to advanced levels, and that, I think, certainly when I was growing up, was the case. It was really frowned upon for various reasons, which I'm going to sort of explore in a few minutes. But I do know of one or two current Jehovah's Witnesses who have chosen to go on and get further education, and they've coupled that with pioneering. So whilst the majority don't go on to higher education, a few do, and that is a personal choice. But generally, the instructions from the governing body, the leadership team, is that they do actively do not encourage young people into higher education. And this has so many implications. It has a massive impact, and it is widely known that members and also former members of religious cult groups, of which, in my opinion, Jehovah's Witnesses are, they have one of the lowest educational standards amongst their community. And this leads to so many different issues, such as poverty, ill health, poor financial decision making, and so forth. Now, I'm going to explore why Jehovah's Witnesses do not encourage higher education and the impact that this has. Now, when I was growing up, there were numerous magazines, including the Awake and the Watchtower magazines, Kingdom Ministries, and also books like the youth book, where as a young person the instruction was so clear that education is, or higher education, is going to be of no value to you in the new system, and therefore it's inconsequential that you should go and get a higher education. And there were all sorts of reasons for this, and some of them I look back on now and I think that's just crazy. It's absolute craziness, the reasons why you're discouraged to have an education. And some of the reasons why you were not encouraged to go on to higher education was the governing body felt that the association in universities and colleges was bad. And I remember so vividly having the instructions, and we're studying the magazines and the books, painting this picture that people who go on to higher education here in the UK in universities, and I'm sure in other countries, I know in America you call it college, etc. But the picture that was painted was that you were going to be influenced by this worldly thinking and likely to get involved in drugs, prostitution, in excessive drinking, and you were mingling amongst worldly people who got involved in the most horrendous and horrific acts of debauchery, etc. The picture that was painted for me when I was growing up, being very, very impressionable, being 14, 15, 16, was that I'm going to be led astray if I go to university and study, because that was Satan's field for really getting young people into very bad, evil, wicked behavior that would bring shame upon your family and community. The picture was painted so badly that it really did put me off going and getting a higher education, because I felt that the system was coming to an end. There wasn't much time left, and the organisation was really preaching and teaching that because of this shortage of time, then don't waste your time going to university, getting an education, but rather go and spend your time in the field service, preaching and teaching and trying to save lives. And subsequently, that's what I did. I left straight out of school. I got baptised in the July and started pioneering the very next month. Now, as a result of that, I got a very basic education. And there was nothing wrong in that, but my education wasn't enough to get me good jobs and a decent income. So like a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses, they come out of school, start pioneering, but end up doing very menial jobs such as cleaning, basic admin jobs in offices. They lots of men have, the amount of men in my congregation that were window cleaners. I mean, we had like 3 elders in the congregation that I attended that all had cleaning rounds, window cleaning rounds, and a number of young brothers that they then employed or encouraged to start a window cleaning round was just ridiculous. In our area we had so many everybody had really sparkling windows, and I'm not saying that there's anything wrong in those jobs, because those are good jobs and they're essential jobs to have in the community. But when you have an organisation that encourages its people to have very limited aspirations, to get a job as a window cleaner, or do very menial and manual jobs such as cleaning, whilst there's nothing wrong in those jobs, then the tone is, this is all you should do. And that, as I came away from being a Jehovah's Witness, you realise actually That is so wrong. And one of the things that I remember they used to say was that in the new system, there is going to be no need for doctors. So you don't need to get a medical degree. No need for nurses. So again, you don't need to go on to be a nurse. There is no need for scientists because Jehovah's going to take care of the environment. There's going to be no need for, certain professions such as being, working in the banking system because Jehovah's going to take care of all of that. But however, skills such as building skills, carpentry, plumbing, electrics, those are fantastic roles because we're going to need those skills in the new system. So again, in my view, now that I've stepped away from being a Jehovah's Witness, it's all very fantasy. Because take, for example, and let's just imagine for 1 second that what Jehovah's Witnesses say is true, that this fantasy of Armageddon coming, mass destruction, people being destroyed, the earth is going to be littered with dead people and dead animals, and buildings are falling down all over the place. Say, for example, just for a minute, that is true. The one thing I used to always ask was this question: what's going to happen to all of those dead bodies? Who's going to clean up those dead bodies? Who's going to bury all those dead bodies? Now, surely you're going to have professional, qualified, skilled and knowledgeable people to be able to take care of the dead bodies without spreading diseases. Oh, but wait, there's going to be no more diseases. So we're just going to miraculously overnight be diseased free. We're not going to get disease from all the dead bodies that is rotting across the earth. So when I used to ask this question, well, how is all of these dead bodies going to be taken care of? The answer that I always got was, well, Jehovah's going to take care of it. One day we'll wake up and all those dead bodies will have gone. Jehovah will have taken care of them. And I'm like, well, that's interesting, because when we have natural disasters here on the earth, we have earthquakes and tsunamis and all these natural disasters. God doesn't just miraculously clean up the place. No, man has to do that. And you have to have skilled, knowledgeable and professional people who can manage a rescue plan, who can take care of the community and make sure that the community is safe. And you're going to need a range of skills and a range of professions. And even if we do need a shed load of builders and carpenters and plumbers, okay, you still need people with construction knowledge of not just the physical of laying bricks to build a house, but architectural skills and other skills to actually build and plan, buildings and repair them. There is just so much that is going to be needed. So to me, that didn't add up, that just doing basic admin and manual labouring skills is going to be needed. It just didn't add up for me. So these are the sort of skills and jobs that the governing body encouraged so many young people like myself to have, and to spend our time in the field service as pioneers, which, by the way, is unpaid. It's totally voluntary. There is no compensation, no remuneration for that. So essentially what that was doing was driving people into a state of poverty. And I could put my hand up and say, yes, I was poor, because I was working part-time in a very basic job, spending my hours and my time out in field service, and didn't have any money to enjoy life, to buy clothes, to buy a house, etc. Didn't have money for that. But as far as the congregation went, I was a very spiritual sister, because I was doing what the governing body wanted. So the governing body really encourages its people not to get involved in education, but to dedicate their time in worshipping and serving Jehovah, this God called Jehovah, who I believe is an idol. It's idol worship that Jehovah's Witnesses are involved in. My personal view is this Jehovah has got nothing to do with the true God, the divine, the almighty, the creator of the universe. He's got nothing to do with that, but rather a man-made idol. So the governing body really encourages its members to get involved in serving this idol called Jehovah. Now, I remember some Watchtower magazines, and also we used to have in the I think it was the Awake magazine, there was always a section called Young People Ask. If you remember that, then leave me a comment in the comment section below. But yeah, there was a whole section called Young People Ask, and in that they would cover a wide range of subjects for young people, and in particular there was always mention of the education system and really deterring young people not to go into higher education. And there would always be a sister or a brother who went to university and really regretted it, or went there and felt it was a really bad use of their time. There was always that, in order to try, almost like this one example would be used to really set the path and say, see, you know, you don't need to go to university because somebody went and they said that, you know, they were tempted to get into drugs and to stop serving Jehovah. So you best stay clear of that. There was always that undertone in the magazines. So instead of encouraging young people to go on and get a higher education, the emphasis would be, well, if you want to have an education other than a introductory and basic education, then learn a trade, go and learn a trade, you know, become a carpenter, a plumber, a mechanic, you know, learn a trade. And that was always the undertone. Now, you may well ask, well, what is so wrong with young people going on to university and getting an education? Why is it that the governing body discourages that? Well, this is my view. Now, my son, I absolutely love him to death, but my son, he went to university because I didn't have that opportunity to go on to university straight from school. Now, I went on to university after I left the Jehovah's Witnesses. Thank goodness for that. Well, thank goodness that I left the Jehovah's Witnesses, but also I am so grateful that I had the opportunity to go on to university and build myself a career. Now, as a parent who used to be a Jehovah's Witness, I saw the value of getting an education. And when my son was coming to the end of his basic education here, and we call that secondary school education here in the UK, we sat down and we had the talk, and I really encouraged my son to go on and study at advanced level with a view of going on to university. And he did. He went on to university and he left with a really good degree. Now, the person my son was when he left home at the age of 18 to go to university for 3 years was a completely different person that came back at the age of 21. And there was one major reason why my son was a different person. And it wasn't because, as the Jehovah's Witnesses said, he was getting involved in this debaucherous life. He, wasn't getting involved in drink, sex, rock and roll and all the rest of it. Although I would have done if I was in university. But no, seriously, he wasn't getting involved in that. He was being a young man and he was enjoying life with his peers in university, away from home for the first time, mixing with new people and just enjoying life. Yes, they would go out and they do Freshers Week over here where they do pub crawls and, they get involved in, drinking and going out to all different pubs and clubs. Yes, they would eat pizza for breakfast and noodles the rest of the week because they had no money. They did what students do, what young people do, and I supported that and I encouraged that, and I said, son, go and live your life. Yeah, there were a few don'ts, like don't get involved in drugs and all the typical drugs, cocaine, crack, heroin. Don't get involved in that because that's just stupid. But my son's he's got his head on and he was like, Mom, don't worry, I'm not going to get involved in that. And he didn't. But, other than that, he was just enjoying his life. But the reason my son came back as a completely different person was because what university teaches young people is to think for themselves. University teaches them, don't just think narrow. The world has told you up until this point that things are black and white. And at the age of 18, you might start to have your own opinions and you might start to think, oh, actually, yeah, black and white, but there's different shades of grey out there. But what university teaches young people is to think in an array of colour, to think broadly, to see different perspectives, to see the light, not the governing body's light, by the way, but to see the light, to see different shades of blue, not just one shade, to see different shades and tones of green and pink and red, so they start to look at life in colour. And that had to be the most amazing gift the university gave my son. He was able to look and think of things critically. So, for example, me and my son, we're very, very close, and we talk about all sorts of things. And my son said to me the one day, I said to my son the one day, look at the sky, isn't it beautiful? And he said, what do you mean, the sky? And I said, well, that up there. He said, but Mum, think about it. What is it up there? He says, there's absolutely nothing. We call it the sky in order to contain it and to give it context so we can conceptualize it. But he said, the sky isn't a thing. There's just nothing up there. I looked at my son and I was like, you know what? I'm so proud of you, because he was challenging me on what I thought and putting down new concepts for me to think about. So when we talk about religion, which we often do, he challenges my concept of what religion is, of what religious beliefs are. He challenges me on things like my perception of God and who God is and what God is, and even if there is a God. And I welcome that, because it's made me stop and evaluate, because we're taught, you know, from my earliest memories as a child, that there is a God, period. There is a God. But what my son did at university, he was able to really think quite broadly and quite freely, and he challenged for himself that concept of God. And he made me, through our conversations, challenge my beliefs. And someone said to me a couple of years ago, because my son, he's an amazing young man, he's absolutely amazing. He's so loved. To know him is to love him. And he can be quite quiet. And somebody said to me once, oh, your son, he would make an amazing Jehovah's Witness. And I was like, no, he wouldn't. Don't be fooled by the fact that my son is quiet. He would not be an amazing Jehovah's Witness. In fact, if he was a Jehovah's Witness, he would be disfellowshipped every day of the week, and I would be right behind him, because he would challenge everything that is said in the magazines, everything that's said in the books, and everything that comes out of the elders' mouths on the platform. He would challenge it, and he would challenge them, and I would be right behind him. So no, he wouldn't make a good Jehovah's Witness, because you can't pull the wool over my son's eyes. There's none of that. So that is what university did for my son. And for so many people who go on to university, whether as young people or as older, mature students, what university and higher education does, it takes you from that narrow thinking and starts opening up your mind, opening up your perspective, so you could see things much broader, and to start thinking in colour, and start thinking in different shades of colour, and looking at things not even just upside down, inside out and backwards, but just looking to see if what you're looking at even exists. And that is what Jehovah's Witnesses, the elders and the governing body, is so afraid of. And that is why, in my opinion, they do not encourage young people to go on to higher education. They don't want people to think for themselves. They don't want them to think broadly and challenge what they're being taught. And therefore, they use all these absolutely ridiculous excuses to keep people down. They use these excuses of, you know, if you go to university, you're going to be influenced by bad association. You're going to become materialistic. That was another one that we were told when I was growing up. You're going to be materialistic. You're going to start thinking about worldly things and accumulating all these material things. you're gonna it shows a lack of faith. You're going to have no time for Jehovah, no time for personal study. They make all of these excuses with the threat that if it takes you away from Jehovah, then you're going to be killed at Armageddon. Yeah, so there's always a threat at the end of it. So with this threat constantly hanging over you, not only is the mind control strong enough to prevent you from even looking at going to university, but having that threat hang over you, in my case, was enough to deter me from going to university. Another thing that they actively taught was that by going to university and getting an education, you're going to draw attention to yourself, and that is something that Jehovah's Witnesses just don't like. They don't like the fact that if you do something, you're going to draw attention to yourself, and that you're going to be material. You know, we all need a house. We all need a roof over our head, clothes on our back, food in our belly. And if that makes you materialistic, yes, please, I'll be materialistic, you know. But it was just, now that I've come away from it and I look at what they teach, I just see how ridiculous it was. But, you know, I had an absolutely lovely viewer of mine make a really valid comment on one of my videos. The video was Jehovah's Witnesses, who do you think you are? I will put a link in the tag above here, so please feel free to click on that tag and to check out the video. I will also put a link in the description box below, and so you can see that, so you can see the video. But she made an absolutely brilliant comment, and it was this comment that really inspired me to do this video today. And she says, just to paraphrase, that by the governing body not encouraging and supporting people to get an education, it is actually irresponsible. Because whilst in the UK, here in England, and also in maybe across Europe and in the USA, there may be a standard of living, which means that people can get by doing menial, low paid jobs. It might mean that, you know, by doing that, they still have a reasonable standard of living. But that's not the case across the world. And she made the excellent point that particularly in a lot of African countries, families invest in their firstborn. They often work hard, save money for many years to send their firstborn child off to university to get a higher education. And, you know, it's not uncommon to see young African children all desiring to be a doctor, a lawyer, to, you know, very highly educated. And that isn't about promoting yourself. It's not about materialism. It isn't about, you know, drawing attention to yourself. For many of those individuals, it is simply about a means to survive. And she makes the point that when people in many African communities, and I know this is similar in a lot of Asian communities too, that when they send their firstborn off to university to get a higher education, it's so that they can send money back to support the family who are often living in poverty. And that person can send money back so that other members of the family can also go and get an education to, again, help the greater family, the wider family, to come out of poverty. It's also an opportunity to provide a pension for the mother and the father as they get older. It's not like here in the UK where we have a government pension system. And I know for those of you in the UK, there are all sort of issues around it. But when I get to retirement age, when lots of people get to retirement age, we're going to have some sort of pension, either a private pension or a government pension, or for some people both. There's some kind of pension system. But in many African and Asian countries, there are no pension systems. And your pension is your child, the child that you invest in, the child that you send off to for an education, that child that is now studying and learning and working hard so they can send money back to feed the family, to send other members off to get educated so they can then also feed the family and provide a means of living. And I mean, that was just the most fantastic perspective and comment that she made. And because I'd never, I live in England, we have poverty, but our level of poverty is still of a particular standard. And poverty for me can be a completely different level of poverty to somebody who's living in rural India or rural Africa or, different parts of the world, completely different level. So for the governing body to issue a blanket dictate, because when they're issuing these dictates, it's not saying, well, this applies to you in America or you in England, but not to you in Africa or India. No, it's a blanket dictate. And this blanket doesn't encourage people to go on to education. And it's fine, and she says in her message, it's fine for those governing body members who are living in Warwick, who are being chauffeur driven around, who's flying first class into different parts of the world, who's staying in luxury hotels, who, by the way, that is being funded by donations and contributions by its members, and so they are not seeing poverty. And in fact, they don't need to go on to university to work to earn a living, because they're being supported by 8 million people who are contributing their hard-earned money, even though many of them are in poverty. So they're not seeing the real world. They're just not seeing it. But the point she made was absolutely spot on. And thank you so much for making that point, because it opened my eyes. I hadn't looked at it from that perspective, because we often look at things just from our view, from our angle out of our window. We just look at things from there. We don't often see the world from other people's view. So that was a really, really good point that she made. So thank you so much for making that point. And I just needed to mention that in this video today. The other point that she quite rightly mentions is that when the organisation is, or the governing body is encouraging people to go out and serve as pioneers, again, in many African and Indian countries, it could be in very rural territory. Now, I live in a city, and my city of Birmingham is very highly populated and it's very built up. And when I was pioneering, although I didn't have a car, there was local transport, there was buses, there was trains, and I walked. I often walked miles and miles, but it was relatively safe. Now, if you're pioneering even in England or in America and you're pioneering out in a rural area, again, you may still have access to a vehicle or public transport. But again, she makes the point that when you're out in field service in a rural area like Africa or India, for example, you may not have access to public transport or to cars, and it can be dangerous. She makes the point, very dangerous in so many ways, not least of, you know, walking miles and miles in fields with nobody else around, but whatever local dangers there are. I know that for me, if I'm walking down the road here at night and I've been walking miles, there's always a house that I could knock on if I end up in danger, either physical danger or, you know, I take ill or anything like that. But that's not going to be the same in other parts of the earth. And in fact, I remember there was an article, you know, some things just stick in your mind. And there's an article that I remember we studied, and basically it was saying that you've got no excuse not to go to the meetings and field service. That was basically the tone of it, is that you've got no excuse. And they used the example of this brother who walked for miles, who swam across a crocodile infested river and lived in the bush for days so that he can get to his meetings or his convention, and had to travel back. And they were using that to make the point that we have no excuse not to go to the meetings. But in the same tone, it highlights the dangers that are out there when people are expected to travel to get to meetings and to go on field service. So yeah, you know, very, very irresponsible. Whereas if people were encouraged to have an education, they could, without guilt, go and learn, get a good job, support their families, and if they still want to, have time to practice their religion and their beliefs. And that's absolutely fine. But it's when people are so indoctrinated, like I was, that it can really shape your life by listening to the dictates and the advice that comes down from the governing body. And then it has other implications. You know, we know that some of the least educated people have poor financial planning. And again, we know with so many Jehovah's Witnesses, because we were told back in the day that the end is coming in 1975, and they've put all these various dates. People didn't buy houses. They didn't invest in pension plans. They didn't save for the future. And they lived day to day. And it breaks my heart when I hear of particularly older people who are coming up to retirement, or who've reached retirement age, and they're still having to work because they made no provisions for the future, because the governing body told them, you don't need to do that because the end is coming. And again, a lack of education meant that they followed the instruction of the governing body, and they've ended up in this very dire predicament. It also has health impact when you have low education as well. And again, we see so many Jehovah's Witnesses making decisions that affect their family's health, and in particular in regards to the blood issue. And again, lack of education, they choose to follow the dictates of the religion, who changes its mind, you know, as fast as the wind blows. A couple of years ago it was absolutely no blood, but now you can have blood fractions, and you know, whereas if people were educated and allowed to have an education, they could then make an informed decision without the mind control of the governing body to think about what's best for them and their families. So the governing body really is controlling people, and in my opinion, if they can get young people to not go on to higher education, because really that's the group that is likely to go on. And yes, whilst some mature people go on to education, higher education, it's really young people. If they can control the minds of young people and encourage young people not to go on to higher education, straight away they've got you. But also they know that if they can control you to not have education and keep you under the radar and keep your mind closed, unlike people like my son who's got his mind open to things, if they can keep your mind closed, they can continue to spread their lies, knowing that you're going to believe it. And they could say whatever they want, instruct you to do whatever they choose, knowing that you're going to follow. And that's what having poor education or very little education does. It keeps you under the thumb because you won't know any difference. It's like people who can't read or write. They have to rely on somebody else who can read and write to give them the accurate and correct information. And this is where people get duped. And in fact, so I know myself, and I consider myself to be an intelligent woman, you know. So, you know, I wouldn't call myself a fool. I'm definitely not a fool. However, there are times when I've not read the small print on things like, you know, buying a car or, you know, a house or, you know, a piece of equipment. I've not read the small print. And then when a problem occurs, you realise actually you've been had because you've not read the small print. I've trusted that the seller, that they were going to do right by me. And that is exactly how it is with the governing body. It's kind of like, you know what, don't read the small print. We've read it. You can trust us. And recently they said in JW Broadcasting, I was watching the other day, it was actually said that you need to put your full trust in the governing body and be prepared to follow their instructions, even if it doesn't make sense to you. So that's basically saying, don't bother reading the small print. We've got you. We've got your back. But it only suits them when you're doing what they want you to do. And the minute you decide you're not playing ball, they're throwing you out. So guys, you know, what I would say to you is use your God-given critical thinking skills. Everybody has got those. Get an education. Encourage your young people to get an education. And if you're older like me, then embrace learning. You may not want to go back to university and study. Some do, some don't. But there's different ways of educating yourself. Pick up books. Start reading. Talk to other people. Get involved in debates. Just start thinking broadly. Question things. Don't be led. Don't be a sheep, because that's what Jehovah's Witnesses encourage their people to be. They want you to be sheep that follows along blindly. Be goats. Be a goat and be stubborn and question things. And question things from an independent perspective. Not, you know, when I was Jehovah's Witness, people used to say to me, oh, do your research? And I'd be like, oh, yeah, I've done my research. But what I was doing my research from the books that the organisation had recommended, i.e. their own books. There was no encouragement to go and pick up a book from any other source that could potentially be contrary to their view. And if they, and the other thing was, occasionally they used to quote authors and writers from who were non-Jehovah's Witnesses, but again, they would only select articles and section of their work that supported their view. And it was kind of like, oh, well, this author supports, you know, what we say, because, you know, the governing body has seen fit to quote it in their magazine, but you weren't ever encouraged to go and source that book yourself and read it in its entirety, or anybody else's viewpoint on that particular matter. So be critical in your thinking, be broad in your thinking, think in colour and not black and white. So yeah, so guys, that's my thoughts on education. Don't ever be tired of learning and educating yourself. You're never too old to be educated and to learn, and learn from an independent perspective. So guys, that's it from me today. I hope you found my comments and my views of interest. I would be very, very interested, as usual, in your thoughts. So please feel free to drop a comment in the message section below. So guys, thank you so much for being with me. Welcome back to everybody that has previously subscribed, but if this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell, and I will see you on another video. Have a great day. Bye.